So the Black Lotus one was actually a physical card, so I'll come back to that in a minute.
Listen up, Umi. This is a podcast with the most ducker. This is Forge the Narrative.
Hey everybody, welcome to Forge the Narrative. My name is Paul, your host. I'm joined up by Adam Camilleri.
Even all.
And Tanya Gates.
Hi, everybody.
Hello, we are the Bell Lost Souls podcast. After last week's heavy episode, we're going to take a break for a week and have a bit of a palate cleanser. We're going to talk a little bit about lore this week. We're going to talk a little bit about a hobby segment. And in the middle of this episode, I have a segment from me and PleasantKenobi doing a spot, kind of talking about the bridge between competitive Magic and Warhammer 40,000 and getting, jumping into the hobby with both feet. It's an interesting talk, and I hope y'all stick around for it. And then after that, we'll come back with a hobby segment.
Yeah, it should be a good show. Happy in how the last one went down, but yeah, you're right. It was a pretty, by our standards, it was pretty dense, pretty heavy. And we're really, I don't know, it feels like Red. It feels wrong that Red wasn't here for it. I think that's what we're waiting for.
Hopefully. Work is keeping him from jumping in with us, and he'll hopefully be back next week. And I'd like to talk about taking a stand on certain things. Now, I don't want to necessarily overly advocate what that stand should be, but when you take a stand, what the potential impact of that will be, and maybe you can make some better choices or more informed choices about what your stand should be after we've had that discussion.
Beautiful. Love it.
Yeah,
always love helping people make as informed choices as possible. So I am neck deep in the Horus Heresy at the moment, and I had a fluff question or a fluff topic I wanted to discuss, but mostly with these two lovely people. I've been mulling over this question we got given. Me and Paul are on another show called the Thursday Show. If you haven't checked out that amazing program, please do so. But we got given a few It's on Thursday, it turns out. But we got given a rapid fire question. It just simply stated, did the Emperor plan it all? And I've been mulling this question over ad nauseum, trying to come to a conclusion in my head, because that's just how my brain works. It needs to come to some form of conclusion. But is that something you guys have ever discussed or wondered or pondered?
I don't know that I have in that context before. Because there's certain, being in, having this live in my head for as long as I have, I'm not exactly sure when all my opinions gelled up.
That's a thing, though, isn't it? Because, there has been a lot of iterations of the lore, and when you and I probably started, and you even before me, Paul, started playing, the lore was at a much smaller scale. Like the Horus Heresy didn't even exist as a novel form. It was only really in little blurbs in the bottom right hand corner of codexes.
A couple of paragraphs in these amazing tomes, by the way, which the Black Library or Forge World Games Workshop has reproduced to those two just epic tomes, The Slaves of Darkness and The Lost and the Damned. They are so flavorful. They got just this texture to them that just draws you in with the pictures and the lore. But yeah, Horus Heresy was 2 pages worth of stuff.
Yeah, so it wasn't really something I considered or I conceived when I first started playing. Literally, when I started playing Armageddon, the Third War of Armageddon was the world to me. That was the only piece of fluff that needed to exist for my enjoyment. And I engrossed myself in that. But now I'm starting to do that with the Horus Heresy and to a later extent the Siege of Terra. I'm listening to Solar War, first book in the Siege of Terra series. And so I've started to mull this over and I've come to a couple of conclusions. I think the Emperor did plan it all. So to some extent, I think to some extent there was always going to be kind of an infight between Space Marine legions, as in there was some kind of inbuilt redundancy into their construction, into their something, because otherwise how do you explain how easy they were to turn against the Emperor? It was legitimately kind of easy when you put it all together. All it took was Lorgar landing on a world and the influence of Erebus and Corferon, and bang, heresy. It happened.
I think that's a bit of a simplification.
Oh, absolutely. But if you want to see where the pebble was that turned into the avalanche, that was it, wasn't it? That was the seed.
I mean, okay, so I just finished reading The First Heretic, and they kind of just covered this. Now, whether or not you want to, I don't mean no spoilers, but whether or not you want to take the word of a chaos spawn, not a chaos spawn, a demon.
It's been a half demon.
thing. But it seemed like the Primarchs were all sort of born out of a sort of magical mix of science and chaos, through some sort of like agreement between the Emperor and the forces of chaos. So I mean, at a certain point, like, isn't that kind of bred into their genetic code to be somewhat
Susceptible.
right?
Yeah, that was my assumption as well. I was like, at some level, I think the Emperor wanted a contingency and built in that the Space Marines, because literally what happened. Like, they got the Crusade event, like, didn't peter out, but kind of met its objective, and then they turned on each other. It's almost like that was how it was always going to be. You know, how could it be that simple? But
The
now what
Crusade didn't reach a natural conclusion.
Not quite. It met its goal of kind of consolidating the vast majority of the galaxy, and the rest of it could have, like, with the fall of Ulanor, and then the Emperor essentially said, "Well, this is mostly done.
Yep.
I'm going to wash my hands, take a back step." And then Horus continued, and the galaxy was, to all intents and purposes, like, overwhelmingly dominated by the Imperium. Yeah, there was no other galactic empires in contention. They knocked out the last one, being the
the
Orcs.
Eldari had gone into decline. Necrons didn't exist. Well, they didn't exist as
strength. Yeah,
they were not awake at the time, I don't think.
Nids hadn't rocked up. The tower was still a concept. Yeah, and so, to all intents and purposes, the galaxy was the Imperium's. They were the only big power player left. I mean, of course, there was, like, super arachnids and all those things.
Yeah, the heresy kind of touches on some other minor things or some non-compliant worlds.
Yeah, and then there was always because Rangdan had already happened, and that we could do a whole episode on Rangda and the little bits that they're letting us know about that. But that was another huge galactic empire that that was xenocided. That was that species was wiped out. Because they needed to. The same for the Orc Empire, even though wiping out the Orcs is almost an impossibility. But yeah, all the other huge galactic empires was gone, and the Imperium stood triumphant and, said, "Okay, Horus, mop up the rest. I'm going to go work on this project." And I think that there was always going to be a point where the Space Marines had fulfilled their purpose and they needed to be replaced. Same as the Thunder Warriors. Like, the Emperor has been very good at using the tools for what they are and wielding them until they're redundant, then replacing them. And as you saw, the Emperor with the Webway project, which hopefully, Tanya, you know a little bit about. I'm not jumping the gun here.
I do know a little bit about it, yes.
Yeah, hopefully with the Webway project, you saw him wanting to make things like navigators obsolete, things like the what's the beacon?
The Astronomicon.
The Astronomicon redundant. He wanted to, he's slowly paring back all the need for contact with the warp, all the need for all these things. And it seems to me that if he made this pact with Chaos to make Primarchs, if he was paring back humanity's contact with the warp, you'd suspect that the Primarchs were going to be a redundant thing at some point and needed to be replaced.
No, I mean, I don't want to get too spoilerific for people that have not read that far, and I'm trying to live in both worlds right now, because you are starting the series to where later in that series it expands upon a lot of what you're talking about right now.
Nice, good. Well, then this is a good place to discuss it, because if I don't have all the picture right now, I think that's exciting.
There is, but there's also, and I can't remember where it is in the books. It might even be the Gilliman walking back to talk to the Emperor after he's woken up. But there's those pillars to where, essentially we're supposed to be like the final resting places of the Primarchs when they were no longer needed. And I don't know if that's theory or fact or suspicion.
Well, there's a lot of there's so much up in the air, and it's truly amazing how much we have left to discover.
To go even further with the Space Marines, I believed that there was at least some credibility to the fact that there was a Space Marine. We think of them now, and maybe they are now, as just fighting death machines, just a living weapon capable of many, many things.
Well, and to that point, you've seen the degrading of the science used to construct them. Things like the Death Company, things like the Wolfen, this kind of wearing down of the structures that keep these things, to all intents and purposes, machines, like you said, from functioning at optimum. And it's quite interesting to see the tale over the 10,000 years. Like, I mean, Black Templars have fallen in their own way into zealotry, into crusading, into, like, not mindlessness, but almost like wearing blinkers and just seeing the world through a single mode of function, which would be abhorrent to the kind of 10,000 years ago the Primarchs looking at their legions as Gilliman looking at them as scholars, as diplomats, as artists,
Well,
etc.
that's it.
etc.
At the end of all this, the Space Marines, I believe, were going to be installed one per planet as like the governor of the planet.
Yep.
One each.
One each. Now, one of the reasons I think there was always going to be some I don't want to say a cull because of that's what happened to the Thunder Warriors. They met their end and they were culled off. I don't think, to your point, I don't think it's correct to say that they were always going to wipe each other, like they were going to be destroyed completely. But I do think the removal of the Primarchs was always necessary to some extent. Could you imagine what a Conrad Kurz in peacetime would look like? Like, what is that guy? Like,
No, I think that you're right. There was definitely a plan to retire one way or another the Primarchs.
Some of the things at the cause of these the humanities or the creations of these characters does not exist without a conflict. Angron, what is Angron if he doesn't have a focal point for all the vehemence and the anger inside him? What is that guy? And the same could be said for for Gilliman. If there's nothing left to build, what does Gilliman become? If there's nothing left to tear down, what is Perturabo?
Yeah, I think you're on. You're onto something.
Dawn, not Gilliman. But same for Gilliman. If Gilliman doesn't have a galaxy to build, if he doesn't have anything to administer,
yeah,
I suppose that's what he become.
An empire as a hobby. Those.
he just step right back into administration, get a nice cushy desk job. He'd be happy.
Yeah.
So, have you guys read Legion?
Yes.
I actually, so there's a sad story about me and Legion.
Uh-oh.
I went to a football game, caught the train, I took the book with me, and I read about 2 chapters there, and I left it in the stadium. Didn't bring it with me on the way home. Sat underneath my chair at a Western Bulldogs game somewhere in the Mars Stadium. Not Mars Stadium, sorry. In a stadium in Melbourne. So I never finished that book.
You know what? I feel like I should just spoil it for you for all
I
the things that you've spoiled for me.
I know most of the plot points of the heresy.
We gotta respect the listeners. We can't spoil too much.
You can spoil it with you off air in the break. You can just be like, "Ha, take that, Adam."
Anyway, there's something that happens in that book that shows that somebody else had seen a possible outcome if the horse heresy didn't happen.
Yeah.
Right. So
I know. Yeah, I'm well aware.
You know all about that.
Yeah.
So if that person or persons could see this horrible outcome that would have happened if the Horus Heresy did not happen, well then obviously the Emperor, since he is the greatest psyker that humanity has ever created, could obviously see that possible outcome as well. So maybe it is like you said, like maybe it is like the off switch or the way to make sure that other possible future doesn't happen.
Yeah, I think so. I like that added. What she's talking about is there's an influence of another race during the Horus Heresy trying to guide things towards a certain outcome, and it's a lovely little piece that G-Dub or the Black Library writers have added in that adds a lot more intrigue. But another point I wanted to come to. So there was Thunder Warriors. And at the same time Thunder Warriors exist, the Emperor was able to create Custodes. Like, those two things coexisted. That's like having a V8 supercar or a supercar, M1, racer, and having your Datsun 500 or your Pee-wee 50 motorbike, Those two things existed in the Emperor's arsenal at the same time. Not to be hugely disparaging the Thunder Warriors, but they were built in a certain way to do a certain thing. And then you had this fully teched up, roadster that, like it was a beautiful old Mustang, the Custodes, never going to not look good.
Have you read Valdor?
I have not read Valdor
Man,
yet.
see, you're just basically knocking on the the series is working for you, my friend. You are
beautiful. So you're saying I'm having the right thoughts at the right times.
I think that you are definitely, like, you're really getting all the subtext. You're getting a lot of what's in these novels, and I believe you'll see a payoff. At least, I mean, I'm not saying it's going to work out exactly like you're predicting or theorizing, but the subjects are going to be touched on from what you're talking
Mm.
about.
Well, so what this tells me, though, and the conclusion I came to that when I realized that these two things existed at the same time, was that the Emperor had the ability to make custodes at the same time he was mass producing Space Marines. And I asked myself, why didn't he just make, 100,000, 200,000, 500,000 custodes? He had 10,000 of them at the start of the Crusade. He always kind of had a bodyguard of 10,000 of these guys. So why not make 50,000, 100,000, 200,000? Why not use them to do the Great Crusade? And firstly, I talked to you guys off stage, and you're like, well, there's some lines in there saying that custodians are very hard to produce. They take a lot of energy to
Maybe.
produce a
No spoilers. I don't know. I think that's the case.
Yeah, but that's the assumption people have put up. Even other people who I've put this to have said that the custodians are far more hard to make, and they're perfectly right. And the other thing about the custodians, they are bred and created to be individual thinkers, to be almost self-starters, to think for themselves and act for themselves based on their own moralities. Space Marines are not. Space Marines are wholly and completely obedient to their Primarch and the Emperor by extension. Like you talk about on Moncaria. Is that in First Heretic where the certain things happened on Moncaria?
Monarchia?
Monarchia. Jeez, I suck. Yeah.
Yes,
So
yes.
you see the Emperor like actually just telling Space Marines what to do, and they have to obey. And you see the same effect happen with their Primarch throughout all the stories. The Primarch rocks up and they have this obedience about them. Custodians are not built that way. So then why build Custodians that way? Why build Space Marines that way? Because you needed something that was mass produced, that you could have an absolute godload amount, and there's the minimum investment for the most output. This is the what's a really reliable car over there that won't die? To me, it'll be a Toyota Camry or a
Toyota Camry's probably right there. Yeah.
Unkillable, it's cheap, mass produced, doesn't break down, off you go. That is a Space Marine,
Have you read Outcast Dead?
No, I haven't.
Man,
Can you reel off a book I have read? That'd be
yeah.
great.
Well, I'm saying that there's a scene. Outcast Dead does not get enough credit, if you ask me. Written by Graham McNeil, and there are some. Now it largely happens on Terra, and there are some scenes in there where Space Marines fight somebody that you're not immediately sure of who or what it is, but it becomes like real apparent, and it helps put some of the stuff that you're talking about in some cool context. And again, you start to think about things in the ways that you didn't necessarily think about them before, which is what I like to get out of a book.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. I love to have my this, especially when I'm invested in a single, not exactly linear plot. I like to just have little bits and pieces added to it because it just brings so much more to the payoff at the end. Hopefully, when we get to the end. But the extension here was, hey, he could have created Custodians, but he created Space Marines. So why would he do that? It's because he always wanted to have a check and a balance to his creations. E.g., the Primarch were checks and balances to each other. There was, so many fell, so many were always going to fall, so many were always going to not. There are checks and balances to each other. And the Custodians existed because when they first created the Thunder Warriors, he needed a check and balance to them. And then they were also the same check and balance to the Space Marines because the Emperor always wanted to have something more powerful than the thing he was wielding. And that was the thought that came into my head. So yeah, exactly. Why do Space Marines? Why not do legions of Custodians? It's because if the Custodians turn, the are you going to do? Half the Custodians turn. I am wrecked. We are so screwed. And so, e.g., he couldn't allow something that powerful to exist because who knows if he could be able to control it or reel it back in if he needed to. And so then I'm like, then how can he have not have planned all of it? How can he not have planned all this redundancy in? And this was just like his next version of the iPhone. It was only built to exist for one. Stamped on the side. Every spaceman picks up their boot and like good for one Great Crusade. Trademark Emperor 3.0. How it's just another iPhone to him that he's just mass produced and put out into the world, and he's just going to have another version until where I think the things that happened that were outside of his control and the things that I don't think he predicted. And I think the big one there was what Magnus did. I think what Magnus did, because of his overreaction to what Magnus did, as in like scorched earth policy, genocidal, wipe him off, it's because it was so far out of his realm of possibility, his predictions, that he went off the rails, lost the plot, and everything started going south from there. At least that's my assumption. That's the way I see it.
That sounds plausible.
Because if they were supposed to fall, if it was always supposed to go, Magnus wasn't. I don't think Magnus was originally part of the group that if the Emperor thought some were going to fall, was going to fall. I think he didn't predict half. He probably predicted a third, or whatnot.
No, he definitely planned to install Magnus on the Golden Throne.
Exactly right. He always did. So therefore, he would never have predicted Magnus was going to fall, and never would have created him something that powerful that he was never going to have full control over. Therefore, when Magnus did what he did, it really upturned the apple cart. This is the conclusions I'm coming to, and that was the far more significant event than Horus turning, because I always think he predicted at some level his Primarchs would turn against him.
This actually leads into the conversation. We'll take a break. We'll leave them on that cliffhanger.
Cliffhanger.
Yeah,
Mic drop.
and when I actually talk a little bit about lore and some of the retcons over the years, and then also the double reason why we are seeing Primarchs in Warhammer 40,000 today, kind of thing, in the next bit of the conversation.
Beautiful.
So let's let folks listen to that, and then we'll come back and talk about the hobby segment.
See you then.
We'll see you in a bit.
FTN is brought to you by Discount Games Inc. Please visit them at www.discountgamesinc.com. And don't forget to ask Jay about ways to save even more on your hobby projects.
Hey everybody, welcome to a very special segment of Forge the Narrative. My name is Paul. I'm joined by Vince, otherwise known as PleasantKenobi. Vince, how you doing, man?
Hello, Paul. I'm good, my friend. I'm very, very good. It's a very warm, heat-struck England right now, but besides that, I'm fantastic.
I've heard about that. I hope it cools down. I know it's unseasonably warm where you are right now.
Yeah, it's like the world's on fire almost, isn't it? Yeah, it's hot, it's sweaty. I'm currently practically naked. I am wearing some undergarments, but I'm yeah.
What a powerful vision that we are creating through this.
The best way to talk about 40k is in the nudie.
Hey, it's hard to argue with that. Well, thanks for joining me, man. I follow your content mostly. You produce a lot of Magic the Gathering content. You've been on the show before, so people may be familiar. But anybody who's not, you've got some great topics, great conversation on YouTube. I follow you on Twitter as well.
Yeah. So I'm a full-time, to just give the spiel a little bit, I'm a full-time content creator. I make YouTube content like 5 to 7 days a week around Magic and also 40k. 40k is a bit more sporadic. It depends. My main focus is Magic, so sometimes I have to let 40k fall to the wayside as I have a spoiler season for Magic that we do this week, for example. And then I Twitch stream at least once a week Magic, often once a week 40k on tabletop as well. Got super into the hobby. I think I was on your podcast, I want to say 12 months ago, maybe a bit longer. Was it about a year ago?
That seems about right. Yeah.
Yeah. We talked through my entry into the hobby, and since then I've just got deeper and deeper. And now I've attended a couple of events. I've got a couple of GTs in my future calendar, and I'm loving it. I'm absolutely loving it.
One of the things that originally got me to reach out to you in the first place is that you also do some content on some partner channels as well.
Yes.
And you would occasionally just like slip in some just random 40k reference. I was like, wait a second, I know what he's talking about.
Yeah. So there's a bit of a running joke on my channel for a while. It's died off on my channel a little bit that we can't go too long without me mentioning Warhammer. So I would be playing Magic the Gathering, and I'll just call something a unit by accident instead of a card. And I do it vice versa. I'll be playing Warhammer, and I'll call something a card instead of a unit or model. So my vernacular would slip. And also, on stream and on calls with my patrons that I hang out with once a week, things just often descend into like, what are we building, what are we painting, and just that sort of stuff.
At the time we talked about you basically jumping all in, you had several, very early on, you had a couple of different armies, you were beginning to learn how to paint, and really embracing it. And then, I've seen that continue even to the point now where where as and when you can, you're hitting up tournaments.
Yeah, I'm giving it a go. I have a silly amount of armies now. Like, last time we spoke, I think I was on like 3. I'm on like maybe 6 or 7, well over 2,000 points. I got like 20,000 points of 40k in like 18 months. It's been a bit wild. And I've been playing Sisters competitively. Not to a great standard, I won't lie. I came 9th at the Hellstorm, into the Hellstorm, I want to say Chainsword, I don't remember which one they're called, about a month ago. And then about 3 weeks ago, I played again, the same list. And then I struggled to a 2-3 finish. So sometimes you take a list and you do well.
Look, the dice are going to be what the dice do. Sometimes the matchups are going to, don't get discouraged.
No, 100%. I think matchups were a big bit. And I also think my list, that was a list that I put together very quickly. So I booked into these 2 tournaments quite late notice. I had like 2 weeks to go. I had 400 points of Sisters painted. And I was like, okay, I've got to decide on a list, submit them 2 weeks out from both tournaments. So there was like literally tomorrow when I decided to go to these events. And then I had to paint up that stuff in that 2 weeks. So I had to set on it very early. And I was playing it a lot online as well. And I was like, oh, actually, I don't have the action monkeys. I can't deploy scramblers. So I had Melter Spam. My list was designed to kill whatever it could and hope to dodge Admech. And for the most part, I did. I didn't play Admech across 2 GTs, which was nice. Did play against Drukhari, though, which wrecked me.
No, but, they got a lot of tools.
Exactly. So I set on a list way too early and then learned that list and realized I had things I needed to change. But when you lock in a list for an event, you obviously can't change it.
Well, you're living in basically like two different worlds, being between Magic and Warhammer 40,000. I'm kind of curious, what you think the similarities are, because these are both what I've noticed from some of your content and your discussion on social media is that you can like to live in the lore space a bit as well.
Yeah, I think I'm just a massive nerd, like too much of a big nerd, right? Like I like competing. I like science fiction and fantasy fiction. I like you said, the lore, the canon. So I think I get really into hobbies on an almost all-encompassing basis. So everything about 40k I like. I like playing. I like painting. I've been listening to the audiobooks. I'm like on book 4, The Horus Heresy at the moment. Listen to a few
You got
others
a
as
long way to
well.
go.
I have, but I keep. The thing is with the Horus Heresy is that if I'm painting Sisters of Battle, I'm gonna swap out and go listen to not Faith and Fury. What was it called? Faith and Devotion. The first recent book when the box set came out. So I swapped to other books. I listened to like Watchers on the Throne when I was painting my Custodes. The Lords of Silence when I was painting Death Guard. So that's the reason I'm so not. I've only done like 4 books of Horus Heresy, but yeah, I love all facets of it. And I think getting into the lore of 40k has made me reflect on the lore of Magic a bit more, and my content has reflected that recently, where I've done like videos deep diving on characters in Magic. I did like a genre study for like Innistrad and stuff, but that's because of 40k and how much I'm enjoying that lore. It's making me look back on something that Magic and Wizards of the Coast could do better to cultivate themselves. They kind of abandoned it at points, where obviously GW, they embrace it, right? They have a subsidiary that pumps out a book a week, doesn't it?
It's the Black Library. Let's do a shameless plug. They're amazing.
Yeah, and I wish Magic had something like that. Like the last couple of novels that we got, I mean, Word of Quest was okay, but there was a couple that were so bad, they're so universally panned, that all they were like memes and like bombing reviews on YouTube and stuff. And I think that scared Wizards off. Like they were really bad, my friend. Like if anyone wants to know how bad they were, there's a great review of War of the Spark by Tolarian Community College, the professor, my podcast co-host, and he is an ex-English professor, and he just rips at a new one in very eloquent and very concise ways. It's terrible. So I wish Wizards cared about the lore as much as Games Workshop does, or at least would put the money and resources into decent novels and stuff. They have short stories, but it's not the same.
I like his content as well. He's not afraid to unleash, some opinions.
Yes, he is. I love Brian. He is often, his comments are people calling him a shill or whatever, but then when you watch the video, like he's very direct and very honest about how he feels about Wizards. Sometimes I try to rein him in because he's so a skeptic of of the company and stuff. But you see that on both sides of the pond. You see that with Magic and Warhammer, right? Some content creators are willing to criticize the parent company, and other ones steer away from doing so.
With the lore in Magic, I don't think outside of tribal decks, and when I say tribal decks, decks that have a common theme for a specific creature type or something that typically they benefit each other, like other things in that tribe get a certain benefit. I don't know if I've ever seen a deck that is like really representative of the lore. Is it really that absent in Magic? And have you really compared the two in your mind or whatever about maybe influencing your 40k list? Do you think there's some aspect that's creeping out and maybe how you do your list in 40k?
I think you're very right there. Like in 40k, even if you build a competitive 40k list, it will often, just by virtue of how the army systems, the codices work, the army building system in the game within the confines of the rules, your armies will still be able to come out like even moderately fluffy. Like, for example, you wouldn't get a Death Guard army with a random, not what you used to back in the day, but with a random Tau, like, drone or whatever in it, right? But in Magic, there are just no rules to how you build stuff, really. There are decks that have Hive color, they don't have any lands, and they're just there to abuse a loop or a combo or whatever. So I think you're right. That is one of the other sides of it. I'm saying how the parent company doesn't care enough to put out good novels. They put out some, but not many. Which is obviously a stark contrast to GW's attitude. But you are right, the game itself doesn't invite you or incentivize you or like just mechanically work in a way that is lore consistent. Where Warhammer, although people would say like, the AdMech, shooty, Skitarii spam lists probably aren't lore appropriate.
It is right on brand. It actually, it's not, I'm not saying it's particularly enjoyable to play against that if you didn't come prepared for it, but it's on brand.
Is the Skitarii list lore accurate?
I believe it is. Yeah, I mean that's a faction. Yeah,
I'm not saying you're wrong. I don't know, because I haven't read the Mars Civil War yet. Because outside looking in 18 months ago when I was looking at Warhammer, wishing I played it as a kid who played back in 3rd edition, I always thought the AdMech were like tech priests and big robots. And they kind of were that when we had like breaches and cataphons, right? And then the new codex has come out and it's Skitarii spam. And I'm like, that's not the admech that I knew. But in all fairness, I'm looking from outside in and I've never read a book about them.
Well, as you're going through this, your Horus Heresy journey, you're actually going to come across a couple of AdMech books. And so maybe it'd be cool to if we reconnect and see if, it'll be fresher in your mind. We'll plan this out.
That is interesting though, isn't it? That I might have this complete wrong, like misconception of how AdMech are meant to look. But to your point, you are right. Magic doesn't work in that space. Decks are rarely on theme. It happens in Commander a little bit. I have friends who are obsessed with building like themed decks. Like a friend of mine just built a D&D themed deck, not just around the new D&D set, but like around having the correct classes in the deck and cards that represent things from D&D. Because some people do play the theme, but like that's never going to happen in a modern or legacy or standard tournament ever.
Commander is a particular format for Magic, the card game where you're playing 100 card decks with only one copy of each card that you choose to put in your deck outside of like basic lands.
Yeah, and it's multiplayer and it's a lot more relaxed. And the whole point is to play what you want. It's probably closest to open play, borderline Crusade in the sense that you do what you want and you have conversations beforehand with your friend about what kind of game you're expecting. Well, if you rock up to play Standard, Legacy, or Modern, you're rocking up to a local event, maybe a GT, where if your opponent is going to like shoot you off the table, you can't really be mad about what they've brought to the table because them's the rules, right? It's a competitive environment. So yeah, Commander is probably the closest you get to that open play environment where people will play themed decks. They will play decks that are like women looking left tribal or like everybody's got to wear hats. Like you can go wild with the themes in Commander.
Only beards,
There is definitely a beard deck out there somewhere. I think someone made one for my channel as like a birthday like list submission.
Oh, that's glorious.
Only characters with beards. So yeah, that's more like open play.
I've heard you say this before, and I think I've actually used this as an example, is that Magic seems to have a finite amount of fun that can happen on the game table. And
yes.
And one player wants to control all of that.
Yes. I do think that happens in Warhammer though too. I think that's the thing that's very simple.
So my question is, do you find that as prevalent? Because look, I mean, you're very knowledgeable about Magic, and I know you're on at least some point in a journey with Warhammer. I'm curious how you're doing these comparisons, or if you are doing these comparisons in your mind.
Yeah, 100%. Like Warhammer is the same thing. It happens for any game where two players play off against each other, right? And there's something on the line, or there's a win at the end of it. Like, if someone is shooting all your models off the table and you're just picking up stuff and you're just losing, like my experiences, to be fair, playing against the current AdMech Codex have been not great. They've been pretty miserable. Obviously, you can look at them as learning experiences. Like I did end up playing against an Alex. I forget his surname. He's an LVO winner. He was my second pairing at my first ever GT. He was playing Iron Hand Successor List, and he shot me off the table. He killed like 1,000 points turn one, maybe more. And that was weirdly enjoyable because my invuln saves were going badly. So that was like adding to the absurdity of it all. And even he was saying out loud, like, my army's meant to abuse this, like, terrain setup, but this is ridiculous. And then I rolled my first 6 on a rhino, so it blew up and killed 10 more girls. And I was like, this is just ridiculous.
Man.
But my point is, that was fun because I learned a lot. Like when I saw like the way he was using drop pods plus incursors plus the forward deploying battle suits, what they call
using the physics of the game is...
Yeah, exactly. The physicality, the space and stuff. Like there was stuff to learn there, and we had a good discussion around it. But he was having all the fun in terms of like in-game mechanics outside of the metagame of it. He was just killing everything, and I stood no chance. And I think that Magic and Warhammer have the same thing, where if you're getting stomped, which happens if you're a good player playing like the best thing, then yeah, there is a finite amount of fun to be had, and you're going to feel salty when the dice don't go your way, or you don't draw what you needed, or your opponent just smashes you.
Do you find it any easier to maybe dig out of what might be a game going south in the first couple of turns, as opposed to in Magic, if you get behind, there's very little prayer of coming back?
I'd say Warhammer has got more room to control what's happening, because you have agency over what your army is and what it does, and then obviously the dice provide some variance. But obviously you're playing to what the averages of the dice are going to give you, right? You never play to like the low odds or the high odds. You're trying to play to the averages. Where in Magic,
sometimes I would just kill for average dice. Like please give me average dice.
I believe a long enough time on everyone averages out. I've been trying to convince my community to stop moaning about bad dice rolls and stop moaning about bad. It is true.
You don't recognize when you rolled average. You quickly forget that almost immediately evaporates away from your brain as soon as it happens. But you'll remember those.
Yeah, definitely. And I've been trying to remember the games where I rolled hot, but also you do get the situation in Warhammer where your opponent will tell you that you rolled hot when you probably didn't. So that can also skew. But they're like losing that. I think you've rolled hot, man. I think I've rolled pretty average. Like, people don't look for their mistake point or their failure point being their mistake, do they? A lot of people would like to put luck in the hands of the gods, as it were, and not admit defeat. But that's not the question you asked me. I think Magic has more non-games. I think Magic has more games where nothing was going right and there's no way to come back from that. You just mulligan. So you draw your opening hand, you have one land. You mulligan down to 6, one land. You mulligan to 5, one land. At that point, you're so behind on chances to win. And that can happen with alpha strikes and stuff in Warhammer. But again, your deployment matters. What guns they've got matters. What armor and infantry you've brought matters. There's more control over non-games in Warhammer, I feel, except for when dumb books are released.
Yeah, so we touched a little bit on this with lore being such a factor. Is how are you picking your armies that you're choosing to play? Are you getting kind of attracted to the figures themselves or the story behind them? Yeah, and then does that make its way to the table?
All the figures are so pretty. That's the big thing about GW, right? They make the best models in the world, and that's why I'm kind of collecting everything, Paul. It's like you are right. Like Sisters being this gorgeous model range, like the Exorcist, the Immolator, and their Rhino basically drew me in. And now I love Sisters, and they're the army I'm playing competitively, or was. I'm probably going to get 1,000 Suns for the next events and stuff.
All right, it's a powerful army, but it's going to be challenging.
What, 1,000 Suns? Yeah. I mean, the fact that Magnus has access to is it 16, 18 spells? I don't know the exact number. I've played him 3 or 4 times so far, and there's decision paralysis. It's great as a Magic player because it feels like you're looking at your sideboard, the 15 cards you have outside the game to change how you play.
Yeah.
So you've got a lot of options, a lot of utility, but again, that gives you, when you've got options, you've got more chances to make mistakes, right? But yeah, I'm not lore fixed. Like my Orcs, I'm probably never going to get them up to being a competitive build. I'm probably just going to do a lot of kit bashing and mucking about. I'm painting a Gazgul right now, even though every website on the internet tells me that Gazgul is trash. But I'm painting him because he's a cool model.
Sometimes he really just works out, though. I mean, you're right. I think ultimately the Orcs are going to have a little bit of time before they settle into what the no fat lists are.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the competitive build that people might be settling on is 9 Megatrack, the Screw Jets, and then 9 Squig Buggies. It's buggy spam, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I'll ever. If I was wanting to play Orcs competitively, I probably would buy, build, and paint them. But chasing the metagame is kind of silly because things change so much, right? The way I was building Sisters even a month or 2 ago is going to look silly once we get the next couple of codexes because it all changes so much.
Do you, as opposed, again, I'm drawing some comparisons to Magic here, but being able to really explore the depth of a codex when the meta shifts and still being able to play, I'll equate it to the colors or the archetype that you want. Are you finding that to be something you can do?
I would say, in the way that I said, there's a benefit to Warhammer having less non-games. I think one of the detriments to Warhammer at a competitive level is that adjusting to the metagame is far more difficult in terms of the hobby lag, the time, and the monetary investment of buying kits and building them, then for them to be out of date within another month or 2. Where with Magic, there's a monetary commitment to getting staples, but you can slide a card in and out of a sleeve, between games if you had to or could do. So I think the ability to adjust to the metagame is much more open in Magic for everyone. Where in Warhammer, again, I'm not at the top tables here, so maybe I'm talking out of my ass here. But
no, this is perspective. I'm curious what you're kind of on this journey.
I think with Warhammer, it's really, there is a top tier of players who the competitive game is their life or a big part of their life, and they have the money, the time, the effort, and the ability to chase the metagame by shifting between armies or having huge collections or just building and painting the next big thing, right? To go from playing 120 Skitarii Vanguard to 9 of one buggy and 9 of another is a huge jump in both time, money, and commitment to paint and stuff. But people are doing it. I just don't think that's easy for the average player. So I've been trying to tell people who are getting into Warhammer, want to go to events, don't worry about chasing the metagame. It's not really worth it. It's worth it because then you can compete.
Well,
So
I mean, competition.
But...
I think there's different aspects to it. I mean, you really get to, you know the ins and outs of your army. You know when it's time to change your plan up during the course of a game, and also the secondaries. I mean, that's another thing I want to talk about. Picking secondaries and that kind of stuff is that can really, when you really know what your army can do, the game opens up, gets a little easier for you.
Exactly. I think people get bogged down with having the correct army composition or the correct counter pick to someone else's army composition way earlier than they get bogged down with the idea of like, what are my secondaries, or how much CP do I need in my list to facilitate my stratagem plan. And there are a lot of other things, like you said, that are fundamentals of the game that will probably give you more percentage points in your final score at a tournament than trying to have the correct way to beat these scrapjet buggies. Because again, you'll probably spend all your time and effort trying to do that, and the scrapjet buggies will be out of the loop in a month's time when like cheese stealer cults come out or whatever. So yeah, I think there are other areas that newer players, including myself, should be focusing on. So secondaries are hard. Secondaries and deployment are the two hardest parts of the game, I'd say.
They really are. And then mastering the movement phases and all that. So if you got anybody that's new, like just really focusing in on every time you interact and moving a model, that could potentially be a game-winning decision.
Yeah. The movement phase is the most important phase of the game, and people should spend more time thinking during that step, right? That's another thing I've been trying to champion a little bit as I lead these. There's a lot of new players on my Discord and stuff, and I'm no expert by all means. People who listen to this thinking, who is this magic playing idiot? But I'm trying to like encourage like good practices at least. And I think the movement phase, I mean, there are other phases that's super important, like the movement you get out of like charging, for example, in certain armies, or how you utilize the psychic phase and sequencing is important. But the movement phase is hands down the most important one in terms of like, it enables every other. It's like a cascade effect, right? It enables everything else.
On that gameplay side of things, is there a correlation to Magic of, knowing when to tap? Not, if you've got options, how to properly weigh out your options to make sure that you don't overcommit or undercommit or make a mistake that shuts off one of your doors for another play even in the same phase.
Yeah, kinda. Like the biggest comparison to like deployment / secondaries, that's the hardest parts, is probably mulliganing in Magic. Like looking at your opening hand and understanding what your deck can do with said cards, and like what your chances of drawing the other cards in your deck that you need to see. So there might be a 4 of in your deck, because you can play 4 of any card, and you're like, oh, I need this card. And if your deck doesn't draw any more cards, if it's just one card a turn, so by turn 5 you're looking at 12 cards in your deck, and you haven't got that 4 of in your opening hand, then it's probably a mulligan. And it's those sort of conversations that are one of the hardest ones to have as a new player, opening hands and mulligan decisions. But once you move away from that, the games start to look extremely different. There is a resource trading element to both games. Like we often talk in 40k about, trading up or trading down. Mm-hmm. It's just a battle. One of the things they're so good at doing is throwing 100 to 150 points at a larger point total and killing it. AdMech, of course, the same with their 200 points Guitari blobs, just deleting like 400 points worth of stuff. There is a bit of that in Magic with trading card for card. If your deck can accrue those cards back by drawing more cards off of card draw engines. And there's also tempo as well, which is a weird comparison. Because in Warhammer, you have a finite 5 turns. And if you can't, if you have a Terminator in the back corner that you deep struck in to deploy a Scrambler, and now it needs to be in the mid-board to hold an objective, and you've got 2 turns to get there, sometimes you physically just cannot get there. And that was one of the hardest things for me to get my head around getting into 40k. Like, you have a limited amount of time. In Magic, the game is infinite in length, in theory, but there is things like if you cast 7 mana, or 7 of your lands tapped into a 7 mana spell, and your opponent stops it with a 2 mana spell, there is like a mana advantage tempo element there, but it's on a different axis. It's not like a time thing, right? It's about resources in the moment. It's almost like CP in a way. Mm-hmm. So there are comparisons, but they're loose because the games do play like quite differently.
Yeah, it's interesting. No, thanks for spending a little time on that. That's as I used to be heavy into Magic a long time ago, and now I like the definition just a casual. Yeah.
Well, you said you're grinding quite a lot on Arena, right?
Oh yeah, I grind Arena. I make my goal to get my quest. I accumulate my wild cards and open up as many free packs as I can get.
Right? When you say you're a casual, and someone says they're a casual Warhammer player, like how many hours of Magic do you play a week? Do you reckon?
I'd say a solid 5-6 hours.
Yeah. So at what point? My question is to you: at what point do you stop being a casual? Like you're casually painting up your models, but you're not going to a tournament. But you spend like 10 hours a week painting Warhammer models. Are you really a casual Warhammer enthusiast?
It's an interesting question. It's like, when does the switch flip? In what is one person's casual to other?
Yeah, exactly. Because there's this dichotomy that happens in Magic, and I think we see it in 40k too, is of competitive and for fun or casual, right? People say, "Oh, I'm not playing competitively. I'm playing for fun," which in itself is a statement that suggests that competitive play can't be fun, which is obviously ridiculous.
Oh no, I
And
don't.
there's this dichotomy.
I don't think that's true. I mean, I know that's not what you were saying, but I definitely don't think that. I mean, I love that.
Oh, I
aspect of it.
agree.
Yeah.
But I think the language of the communities sort of sound like that a little bit. And there's this casual versus competitive thing. There's got to be a scale in the middle.
Well,
And I think a lot of people are further towards the serious side of the hobbies than they think they are. If they're reading the news stories, buying the books and painting the models, even if they're not hitting up the local like GT or Open or whatever.
So I think in this, I've been thinking about this for the last 30 seconds or so, is that I could sit down and play Magic for that period of time. And if I lose 10 games in a row, as long as I'm completing my daily quest or whatever the online, carrot is leading me down,
Yeah.
and lose every game, I'm okay with it. If I were to sit down and play 2 or 3 games of 40k and come away with a losing record, I'm back to the drawing board, figuring out what's wrong. Well, what series of cascade failures has led me to this event of losing a few games in a row.
So I guess you're more willing to put the time in with 40k. I guess what you're saying, right? To learn to be better. Where Magic, it's just not really. You win, you lose, you lose. But with Warhammer, you want to improve.
Yeah, but even with the Magic, like I understand, and I'm okay with the fact that I am competing with limited resources. I have not gone to the lengths of making sure I have a play set of everything or the most efficient version of whatever this effect is or whatever. I'm content with my level of skill versus my commitment of investment, whether that be time, money, resources, or whatever.
But with 40k, I guess you don't want to be restricted by your access to game pieces. Then
no, I want to get whatever I think. Well, there's but see, there's an element of I want my looks cool. I'm gonna if they put out a Blood Angel unit tomorrow, I'm getting it. I don't care what it is or what its stats are. It could be a winged blood paperweight, and it's getting bought and painted.
Paul, that was my next question. Was on this casual versus competitive thing, right? You're building AdMech at the moment, right? Have you got to play them yet?
AdMech and Death Guard, yeah. I have not played them in a tournament setting though.
Okay. Oh no, that's what I meant. Sorry, have you got to play them out like a tournament setting? But,
I have not. Yeah.
My next question was going to be like, you're talking about casual versus competitive. We're talking about lore versus gameplay and stuff, right? But tomorrow you'll be building, basing, and painting a Blood Angel unit if it came out. That's literally my next question to you, because I'm the same. I'm super wanting to compete, but I also want to like kit bash some Star Wars stuff to like orcs, and I will paint anything Blood Angels they put out because I love the faction. So
yeah. I'm really pleased to hear that, by the way. But that's one of the things about this hobby is that you can really live in it, and that's so there seemed to be almost like a flash in the pan controversy for the modern horizons.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, historic horizons or whatever it is.
It's it's called Jumpstart Historic Horizons. That's why you can't remember. It's a 4-word name. It's a confusing one.
Yes, and there's these cards in there, and a couple of them reference. Or is I can't look. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not trying to tell you anything, or if anybody's listening from your side of the shop, forgive me for butchering all of this. But do things like you can conjure tropical islands and black lotuses and those kind of things.
Yes, so they do. So the Black Lotus one was actually a physical card. So I'll come back to that in a minute. There was cards released that are digitally unique. Digitally mechanically unique, which means that they are cards on Arena that do things on Arena that physical cards could not do. So, for example, there is a removal spell that has a perpetual mechanic where it will change the stats on an enemy creature or one of your creatures, as the case may be, and that stat change will follow it anywhere it goes, into the library, graveyard, hand, exile, hidden zone, unhidden zone, whatever. Its stats will stay the same, and it's tracked by the computer, where in paper you couldn't do that without some very clunky like token that has to be on it, and it couldn't go into the library because you couldn't shuffle it in with the token and so on and so on. And there was controversy there because a lot of people feel like this is the barn doors being broken open. This is the floodgates. This is Pandora's box of us moving towards a world where digital magic looks nothing like physical magic. And I'm kind of in that camp where I think the way they've done it, where they put it into this format called Historic, which is my favorite format in the online space, means that space now doesn't exist in paper. You can't just go to a game store and say, do you want to build historic decks and run historic events? Because some of these cards just do not exist in physical and never will do. And I do think 40k players would have lost their as well if there was a similar situation in Warhammer. However, there's no digital client, and there probably never will be at this rate, or not for a good long time. So I guess Warhammer will never have to deal with a similar situation.
Got it. As things progress, do you think that that path is, as long as both formats are supported,
Yes, as long as everything's supported, as long as like paper magic continues, the paper magic formats are continued, and so on and so on, then there's no real problem with it, right? It's a shame that historic being this new exciting thing will never really see paper play. But as long as they're all supported, yeah. And I've been playing a lot of historic, and I like the gameplay, the mechanical ability of these cards. I think a lot of them lead to fun situations. My only bugbear was that it was in historic particularly. Other people, on the other hand, are calling it Hearthstone, which is such a wild thing as well. It's like Magic's not allowed to learn from other successful games. It's not allowed. It's so big it can't fail, and therefore can't learn from other games. Right? This is the funny thing. So people call them Hearthstone cards. I mean, I'm doing it jokingly because it's funny, but some people are like, "Oh, I'm never playing Arena again." Some people are commenting on my videos, say, "I can't believe you're playing with these cards, Vince. How can you do this to us?" And some people have taken it as like an affront to their own.
Well, it challenges, and that's kind of where, I mean, I think I jumbled my question, but with that, for that instance of where that dude conjures the Black Lotus in the physical space, is like that is a character from one of the old lore books who I'm assuming could actually perform those types of tasks.
So One-Eyed Garth is what you're referring to as a card that can, when you tap it, it makes one of 4 different cards that would exist in Magic. It makes a token of it that can be cast immediately. So it's different to Conjure, because Conjure makes an object that sticks around. Like the Black Lotus would go to the graveyard, for example, if it was conjured in the digital space with these new cards. So it does do it. But Garth is from an old book, and he was incredibly powerful. I haven't read the book. I know very little about him apart from the fact that he exists.
Well, that's
but,
whereas if this was a Warhammer 40,000 character, we would probably both know everything about it.
Yeah, exactly. There are wikis for Magic, but even the Magic wiki is like bare bones compared to 40k wikis. I guess there's a good thing and a bad thing there, 'cause I do get the impression that the 40k wikis are sometimes wrong, and you'll chat to people who have evidently never read one of the books and are just like verbatim reading off wiki stuff to you. You're like, and that's not a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with wiki diving. It's fun, but it is interesting that there's almost like a secondary, like a second-hand lore. Like someone's read the book, someone's made a video, someone's watched the video, someone's written the wiki. At that point, we've got 3 degrees of separation.
Doubling down of what could be right. And I'm a comic guy. Like I love comics. I love reading comics. I've been associated with comics, plus or minus some for basically in all my life since.
I don't know that.
10 years old or whatever.
Are you a superhero comic fan?
Yeah, superhero comics. Yeah.
DC or Marvel?
Marvel.
Okay.
All the way Marvel.
I love Marvel, don't get me wrong, but I was a big DC head for about 5 years.
I'm okay with it. Let me say, in my advanced years here, I've become okay with all different types of fan involvement, including the filthy casual wiki reading of
that's how I got into comics, though. That's how I got into it. Was just wiki diving DC Comic Wiki, loving all this complicated and convoluted lore and canon, and then right, I'm going to go read Infinite Crisis, Crisis on Infinite Earths, and that got me into it. So wikis have their place and they're useful. Don't get me wrong. So please, people listening at home, don't think I'm some sort of
I think your wiki page just got updated with.
I wish I had a Wikipedia page.
So with this, with these characters coming in, do you think people, like if they were going to advance the things a certain way, like when you bring these ultra powerful things into the game, should they even be there? How do they justify it? Would it be too much of a compromise if they brought in the characters without all this extra power that we may see get souped up in some sets?
They do it all the time. There's so many random callbacks every other set. They're very. This is the weird thing, right? They're not very good at cultivating the lore outside of the game. So there are novels and most of them are terrible. They're short stories that for the most part are good, but they paywalled them for a while as well. They even have one novel written by Sanderson, I think it is, where he gave the book to Frida Wizards and they, on the condition they didn't sell it, and they sold it anyway. So they have a very bad relationship with the metatextual fiction. But inside the game world, inside the cards themselves, the people at Wizards are very good at what they do. The designers, the creative team, the world building team, they are phenomenal. So we constantly get callbacks and references and little Easter eggs in the art. So it's not just like Garth, the one I got the Black Lotus, and that's the one everyone knows about. We had Urza cards recently. We've had different references to the orreries on Mirrodin and all this stuff that's just going to sound like gobbledygook to somebody who's not super fan of Magic. But they do that a lot, and it's really good. So don't get me wrong. There is an element of it that's wonderful and great, normally in the card art and the flavor text and that part of the world building. I just wish the company on a larger scale could at least look at GW across the pond and be like, they're probably making millions of pounds at this point from these books. Maybe we should do the same.
Well, I'm just happy you get to exercise whatever this part of you that is living inside burning over here in the Warhammer 40,000 space.
Do you know what's an interesting thing, before we close down this conversation completely on lore and stuff, is that I think, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong here, that Warhammer didn't really, or 40k specifically, didn't really release its old canonical characters until more recently. So we had a return of like Guilliman, Mortarion, and Magnus, all before I got into the game. I got back into the game just after like Mephiston had got his remake and stuff, right? So these characters are all coming back. And then we obviously had Horus Heresy, which is then gave you all these background characters and models and stuff for them. But Magic's been doing that for a very long time. Is that fair to say that Warhammer had kind of a static collection of characters and most of them were just legendary?
Well, it goes even deeper than that. That some of them. Oh yes, there's a wide universe. Like the universe is massive, and there's stories to be told all over the place because of how big it was. And some of these characters, for a brief period of time, existed in some capacity. I'm talking like first edition. We're on 9th edition kind of. First edition many years ago, and I guess some of them only existed as like models or as maybe they were captains, and not this Primarch status. But as the game evolved, these figures got pushed up into like mythic capacity and weren't as a part of the game as a playable model. They were there kind of behind the scenes. You were acting kind of as agents of them or something like that.
Is Guilliman a good example of that? Was it he was originally the captain or something and then got retconned to be more, and eventually that became the name of the Primarch? Were the Primarchs not named originally?
Something like that and Guilliman and Lehman Russ, several of those, as the story started to solidify. Now, and those solidified only over a couple of years, and reams and reams of amazing stories have been built off of what were several paragraphs in a book.
So retcons in a way, right?
Yes, but it was been so long ago that I don't even know that if we can really consider them retcons.
Yeah, that's fair. But it's would you say it's a more recent phenomenon that we're getting, the old characters coming back? People coming out of the warp and demon. Like when I was a kid, Primarchs were a thing mentioned in the BBB, the Big Black Book, the 3rd edition book. And the idea of there being a Primarch in the game, they were like super beings, right?
Yep.
And then I come back and I'm like, oh, who's this big blue guy? And my friend's like, oh, that's Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines. And something in me could remember, I was like, a Primarch in Warhammer. It was shocking that they brought these things back. Is that more of a recent development in 40k? Would you say? I think recent, like since 7th edition. It
is. So the demon Primarchs used to exist in a game called Epic. They had tiny little models, but now I believe the model making capacity in Games Workshop, and you mentioned this before, they do make the best models in the world, and they're so talented at it. I think they have the capacity to kick out these, just jaw-dropping, iconic things. And so
the old Magnus model that I've seen, the old one-eyed dude with the staff in the air, is that an Epic model?
That's Epic. Yeah, that thing's an inch tall.
Oh, that's why he's so small. That makes so much sense.
Yeah, that's it.
So I guess they were in the game at some point. They had so Magnus had a stat sheet for Epic, which we're talking that's like 2nd edition era, right? And then he didn't have a 40k sheet till the 7th edition, which is 20 years later almost. That's
right.
Crazy, isn't it?
That's exactly right. That's it.
That's similar to what Magic does. But Magic's been doing it on and on. They've been doing the nostalgia. It's kind of I guess what Horus Heresy books do for Warhammer fans. But Magic have been doing sets where they just here's an old character you never heard of. You remember from Alpha. Here's another character that's only mentioned in flavor text on 2 cards in beta, and they've been doing that for a long time. It's just.
I remember being at a game store not that long ago. I mean, I guess several years ago at this point, and someone was telling me about all this interaction between Tezzeret and Jace, and I was both fascinated that they knew it, or they could have been making the whole thing up.
Those characters do have a rich back history, yeah.
I'll take your word for it, but I just couldn't bite into it. But if we were talking about the Lion and Guilliman or whatever, I'd be like, oh, tell me more.
It is a different thing. I do have an English degree, and I've got a background in I was going to be an English teacher and stuff like that. So maybe I've got more of interest in that sort of thing than most. But I can't really put into words or put my finger on why the Horus Heresy novels have resonated with me more than the average Magic novel has. But maybe that'll change. I've just picked up some old Magic novels off of eBay that are of an old set, which we're going back to early next year. So I'm going to sort of catch up on the old story and do some videos about it. Maybe I'll fall in love with those old books.
Well, once you get through the first four, and they're written by just world class author. And I don't mean that because of their New York Times best-selling status or whatever. I mean these authors are just steeped in this, and they you can tell that they care so much about the subject matter, and it comes out through the writing.
And to be fair, I've been listening to the audiobooks as well. I should put that out there whilst painting. So maybe that helps too, right? When you're sat there painting a model, listen to because the first 3 books especially are incredible of the whole series on Audible. That's probably a bit different to not being engrossed in something else in the hobby and then reading separately, because it's different, right? It hits different.
I think it's going to be. I want to continue to check in with you if I can. Maybe in a few months or so, see where you're at competitively, see where you're at with the novels.
Check up on me, make sure I'm doing my reading, yeah?
And to make sure that we're at least on book 6 or 7 by then.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, it depends what I'm painting. I'm painting orcs now, so I'm probably going to be looking for orc books.
Oh, The Beast Arises. That's it's a fabulous set of series set in a really cool period of Warhammer lore.
Is that during the Battle for Armageddon, like the second one?
I don't want to spoil anything for you, but there's like relevance to even your sisters and stuff.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. I'll have to check it out because I need a good orc book.
Yeah, it gets pretty epic. Well, I mean, I hate to wrap this up, but we're running out of time.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Thank you for having me on, Paul. I appreciate it.
Dude, it's always a pleasure. I mean, hopefully I can check back in with you in a little bit, just because I really as someone who cares a lot about both these games that we've talked about, seeing how folks experience it and express themselves through it means a lot to me, and I want to hear as much as I can.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me on.
Dude, have a great rest of your evening.
You're listening to Forge the Narrative.
Hey everybody, we are back. Hope you enjoyed that segment. It's always great talking events and then people with perspectives, but yet that kind of mindset of wanting to jump in, just full tilt. I love seeing it.
Yeah, me too. It's there's a lot of enthusiasm. Let's not burn those guys out either. I like to feel that for years to come.
So here
right,
in the
cold, dead inside.
We'll talk about the finishing moves. If you're new around here, we have a hobby segment that we do. We try to do it every week. We have with varying degrees of success of doing it every week. But before we started talking in the pre-show, Adam, you had an interesting topic to jump in about, like maybe how to get started with an airbrush.
Yeah, so I've been in a really big hobby lull, one of the biggest of my life so far since I started painting. I haven't painted anything since I moved house about almost 4 months ago. And that's kind of the longest I've gone without painting something in kind of the last 5 or 6 years. And so I cracked everything out, got everything ready. I wanted to start painting at night. I had a week off work, got everything set up my hobby station, set up everything, got a table in the garage. Perfect, beautiful. And I'm like, yes, so excited to start. And then my airbrush is cactus and it is not working. And I've got masking done. Everything's on paddle pop sticks on the night. All the panels are off. I stripped it, scrubbed it, scrubbed it, got it down to the
That's
the
right,
base
because you were taking an older night with an existing paint
Yeah.
job, stripping it down,
Yeah.
and we're going to make it up as in your own wonderful creation colors.
Exactly right. And I had like a week off work. And I'm like, beautiful. I've got this awesome paint project. I'm going to reinvigorate. And then my airbrush was cactus, and I had all these plans to do all these different effects. I want to do some marbling on some shoulder pads and some stripes and things. And I was like, and my bubble just burst. I'm like, wow, a non-starter. I didn't do a single bit of painting over that week off.
An airbrush, I mean, it can be fickle. What I think that means is that even despite your best efforts of diligently cleaning it after every use, you miss something. But you didn't necessarily, maybe you didn't miss something. Maybe you used too much cleaner in there, and then it got gunked up in one of the parts. How the airbrush, look, please YouTube this. Someone don't take my word for it. But the airbrush is made for anybody who hasn't used one or is considering it. There are lots of different parts, and it feeds air through some very, very tiny spaces, and then the width of those spaces is typically controlled by a trigger mechanism. It forces air through those tiny spaces, carrying a little bit of paint with it, and then the degree of that paint is controlled by the trigger. If anything along that path of the 4 or 5, 1,000 stops it has to make along the way till it finally gets out of the nozzle, gets a little bit of gunk in it, could be a little bit of gunk, restricts some of the air or the material, i.e. the paint. You're boned.
Yep. And it turns out that's what's happened to mine. I have everything required to clean this thing. By the way, I have the little pipe cleaners you get for like flossing your teeth that I stick down there. I've got the alcoholic cleaners. I've got the all different cleaners. I've got a micro vibrator. What is it? Ultrasonic cleaner. I've got all the bits and pieces, all the bells and whistles. Here's the mistake I made. This is the first airbrush I've ever owned, and I went above and beyond and got a really high quality one. Big mistake. Do not buy a Porsche on your
With
first
lots
car.
of intricate parts.
Exactly right. Do not get a Porsche for your first car. Get that Toyota Camry we were talking about about half an hour ago. And this is what I've come to now, because the stuff I do with airbrushes is pretty basic, and most of it I do still really enjoy, like panel lining and recess shading with a brush. I still enjoy having a brush in my hand. So my airbrushing has maintained pretty basic. Base coats, some special effects like marbling, which I do with either steel wool or a baby wipe. You pull out the filaments and stuff. So it's really pretty basic. Some masking, some stripes, some things like that. And I didn't need to go above and beyond and get an expensive. I won't tell you the model because I don't want to put anybody off for buying these very good quality airbrushes. But I went above and beyond and bought an expensive, top of the line airbrush, and I just wasn't up to the task of maintaining it. It turns out it has done me about a year, 18 months I've owned this guy, and I've painted a huge amount of models through it, and I've thought I've maintained it pretty well. It turns out I haven't. So
it's probably salvageable. Like this is something that is, you can remedy it.
Yeah, look, so I've cleaned it in every possible way I know how to clean it. I've checked to see if the needle is bent or blunt. It's not. I've checked all the components individually, and I think it's just beyond my expertise. And unfortunately, I'm in lockdown at the moment, so I don't have the ability to take it to one of my mates who probably knows better and probably just ding me over the back of the head and say, "You did this wrong. Don't do this next time."
We're going to walk through this in video conference. I want to try to be here for you after the show.
We're going to get Red on. He's going to blindfold me. I'm going to have to take my airbrush apart, put it back together. Spin around 3 times, stop on 1 foot. Yeah. But yeah, so this is I know Paul airbrushes, Tanya doesn't, and I'm quite new to it. Prospectively, it took me a while to pull the trigger on it as well. I wasn't convinced. That wasn't a yeah. It was a Freudian pun. And I didn't pull the trigger on it because I was afraid that I wouldn't enjoy it and that it would take something away from my hobby rather than bring the enjoyment of the brush and the satisfaction of it. And I just found it to be, I don't know if you feel the same way, Paul, but it just became another tool in the toolbox and enabled me to do a lot of things that I'd seen other people do that I'd always wanted to. Yes.
So with an airbrush for me, I do not have the finer skill of capture of doing too much detail work. Like what I can do is get a solid base coat on and probably that first layer of highlights. And highlights, I can get a little bit of that brightness and maybe a little bit of transition. And maybe if I haven't completely covered up my depreciated tint that I did, you'll see some transition in the airbrush.
Love it.
It saves. Yeah, it's a time saver. I think any of these things that you can work into your routine is potentially a time saver. And when you're doing, let's say, you paint a lot of red miniatures.
I wouldn't know anybody who does that though.
Maybe like Mephiston red?
Yeah.
Nah, no one does that. No, definitely no one I know.
Maybe you figured out a really good recipe and you've also figured out how to make the airbrush work for that second stage of red, that brighter red in your color scheme, and you have the habit of painting 4 vehicles or 30 troops at a time or whatever.
Yeah, chasing certain metas or
or you're getting started with Grey Knights and you want to lay down a couple of metallics. An airbrush is a great tool because that may save you some time. You can then, it ramps you up to being able, and I really suggest any of that time that you save with an airbrush, you spend in the details, like painting extra bits, painting cool shoulder pad details, painting the cases on your bolter, going the extra mile on the purity seals, invest that time back into the cooler parts of the miniature, maybe. Big suggestion there. But the airbrush is not just take it out of the box and instant talent. It's not the Devlin Mud of of army tools.
Man, do you even know what Devlin Mud is, Tanya?
I do, actually. I have a case of vintage paints.
Love
oh my
it.
goodness,
Do
it's
you have old
vintage.
goblin? Do you have old
I have-
goblin?
I do actually, in like
Metal steel.
the old like hexagon pot with like the white sort of cap lid on it. I got those ones.
Man, I still love those. They're legit.
They still work, okay? Like those paints with the hexagon bottle. Oh man, they're still good. They work
It's
perfect
the
to this day.
That's the back in my day things were better.